No, not tomorrow's phone.
By my count, there are about 4 stages that every popular story goes through. In the first stage, the story is brand new. And since it's new, it's not particularly well organized. It might be exciting, but it hasn't been perfected yet. So when we get to the end of this story, we're often left scratching our heads, wondering what the point was. We think, that feels significant, but I don't quite get. For instance, when Mark, the first person to write the resurrection story down, decided to end it with Jesus missing and everyone being afraid.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought aromatic spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, at sunrise, they went to the tomb. They had been asking each other, who will roll away the stone thrust from the entrance to the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled back. Then as they went into the tomb, they saw a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has been raised, he is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples, even Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you. Then they went out and ran from the tomb, for terror and bewilderment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, because they were afraid.
If people like the story and it keeps getting told, eventually it finds its way into stage 2, the well-known stage. This is where the story becomes standardized. Many of the same phrases are used every time it's told. The important details have been selected and emphasized. All of the needed information is there, and that ending just pops. This is where Matthew, the second gospel writer, comes into play.
Now after the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. Suddenly there was a severe earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled away the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were shaken and became like dead men, because they were so afraid of him. But the angel said to the women, do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, just as he said. Come and see the place where he was lying. And go quickly and tell his disciples. He has been raised from the dead. He is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I have told you. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. But Jesus met them, saying, Greetings. They came to him, held on to his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. They will see me there.
Of course, after a while, even the best stories start to get old. They get worn out, which is about the time that they enter stage 3, the tired stage. In stage 3, people are so tired of telling the whole story that they start telling shortened versions of it, leaving pieces out and saying, yeah, they know it already, they can fill in the blanks, no big deal. Even when those gaps are pretty big. Take, for instance, Luke's version of this same story.
Now, on the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women went to the tomb, taking the aromatic spices they had prepared. They found that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. When they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men stood beside them in dazzling attire. The women were terribly frightened and bowed their heads to the ground. The men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has been raised. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified on the 3rd day, rise again." Then the women remembered his words, and when they returned from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now as Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them, who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed like pure nonsense to them, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. He bent down and saw only the strips of linen cloth. Then he went home, wondering what had happened.
When Luke wrote this account of the resurrection of Jesus, it's pretty clear that this story has entered into stage 3. It was tired. It was worn out. It was familiar. So familiar, in fact, that Luke doesn't seem to worry about leaving out some pretty important details. For instance, in this story of Jesus' resurrection, there's no resurrected Jesus that shows up. And even though Luke had just a chapter prior told us that there was a stone rolled in front of the cave to make sure that no one would take Jesus' body out, and that there had been guards posted, by the time the women get there, no mention of the guards is made. And what about those 2 men that show up? It just says 2 men in dazzling attire. Who are these guys? I mean, they could be Siegfried and Roy, they could be Daft Punk, it's just people in shiny suits. We have no idea who they are, but Luke trusts that his audience has heard this story so many times that they can fill in the blanks. Yes, Jesus was resurrected. Yes, there was an earthquake and it knocked the guards out. And of course, the shiny guys are angels. We all know this. We get it. Just get it over with already. And for some folks today, that's still how this story feels. Every year we force ourselves to wake up early. Some of us far too early. We put on our best clothes, some that we bought just for the occasion, just to wear for Easter and may never wear again. We go to church and we grumble on our way there, and then we sit down and we hear the story and we say, okay, yep, Jesus was dead, he came back to life, cool, hallelujah, when's brunch? It's a sad fate for a story. Especially a story that has been called by many the greatest story ever told. It should be something that can stand the test of time. In fact, it should be something that stands on its own. We should be able to read that story and just sit back and say, wow, we get it. You don't have to say anything. That is a crazy, great story. But that's not the case. And if Luke's telling of this story is any indication, it hasn't been the case for quite some time now. Which is why I'm very grateful that stories, if they're good enough, go through a 4th stage. The Easter egg stage. This stage is where a story's details are no longer contained within the story itself, but begin to find their way into other stories. Entertainers know the significance of the Easter egg. That's why when you're watching TV, you'll see frequently scenes that remind you of The Shining or Gone with the Wind or other classic movies. It's why performing artists have a habit of borrowing lyrics and musics from other artists. It's why so many stories have begun with the phrase, "It was a dark and stormy night," despite the fact that most of us have never actually read Paul Clifford, which is where that line comes from in the first place. And there's another reference that seems to show up more than every movie quote, every special scene, every musical hook, and every literary riff put together. And that's the story of resurrection. There's almost never a time when you cannot go to a movie theater and see at least one film where resurrection is featured. Right now, if you go to the theater and watch Beauty and the Beast remake, spoiler alert, there's a big resurrection scene at the end, for those of you that didn't see the original or all of the other remakes that have happened in between. And it's not just that. Resurrection shows up everywhere. Whether you're talking about E.T., RoboCop, half the Disney main characters out there, Sherlock Holmes, Harry Potter, or even the Lord of the Dance, resurrection is everywhere we turn. You might say that the resurrection story is the original Easter egg. But this story is not just a story. The power of the resurrection story will never be fully realized simply through entertainment, through movies and books and music, because the resurrection is not content to remain a piece of fiction. It insists on breaking in all around us into reality, creating Easter eggs for us to find in our own lives. And if we are willing to hunt for them, it is amazing what we can find. In my line of work, I have the privilege of hearing these resurrection stories, because when someone has a story like this to tell, suddenly they've got to find a preacher and tell them all about it. And I get to be that guy sometimes, which is amazing. And it never gets old. Every single one of these stories stays with me and inspires me to keep doing what I do. The story of a man who came looking for community and found not only that, but found the strength to quit smoking and a calling on their life. The story of a 5-minute conversation and prayer in a diner, which led to a man getting sober and reconciling with his estranged ex. The story of someone who expected to die on the operating table, only to have the doctors tell them that they didn't even need the surgery because they had been miraculously healed. The story of a person abused and outcast, certain that they hated God and God hated them back, finally finding the acceptance that they've been looking for, and of all places to find it, they found it in a church. These are not just hypothetical situations. These are not just stories that I've written for the sake of this sermon. These are things that I have been told since last Easter. These are stories that have been shared with me of resurrection coming into our midst. Some of these stories are represented by people in this very room. And I'll leave it to them to say whether they want you to know who they are. But they are real. And it is a joy to witness these stories of resurrection among us. They happened in this community. This community is a place of resurrection. Because the story of the resurrection continues to break through and continues to make Easter eggs for us to find. And while we may not know where the next one will be, we can hunt for it together, knowing that whenever we find it, the hunt will have been worth it, and that we will have the chance to rejoice once again as the women at the tomb did and say, I have seen God's resurrection at work. Christ is risen. There is resurrection all around us, and that is a story that can never grow old. Will you join me as we sing our next hymn, Alleluia, Sing to Jesus.